Welcome to the Church and Culture Podcast, a weekly discussion with Dr. James Emery White on the latest trends happening in culture and where and how the church should respond. Jim is the founding and senior pastor of Mecklenburg Community Church in Charlotte, North Carolina, president of Serious Times, a ministry devoted to exploring the intersection of faith and culture, former professor of theology and culture at Gordon Conwell Theological Seminary, where he also served as their fourth president, and the author of more than 20 books. I am your host, Alexis Dry, and I can't wait to dive into this week's conversation. Hey, everybody, and thank you, as always, for joining us. Now, according to a recent Gallup poll, Americans indicated that the most important problem facing the country right now is immigration, particularly for Republicans. Now, this is the first time that immigration has topped this list since 2019, when at that point there had been a huge surge in attempted border crossings. Well, we're seeing that same big surge again at the border, with around 300,000 encounters noted in just December of 2023, which was the highest monthly total on record. So it's no surprise that the current President Biden also has the lowest rating, on immigration of any recent president at just about 18%. Now, immigration is undoubtedly a topic that is very multifaceted, very emotionally charged, and rightly so. And with the upcoming election, convictions and emotions have, of course, escalated. Now, Jim, what is behind immigration being the most important issue for so many in our country, more than the economy, inflation, race relations, and so on?
Yeah, you're right. This has become the issue of our moment, the cultural issue in many ways of our moment, whether you're a Democrat or Republican, whether it's primarily among the Republicans that are feeling this or the Democrats that are bearing the burden of it because they have the presidency, whether that's fair or not. All of these kinds of things are tangential to really our conversation, which is this is a cultural issue. According to a recent Gallup poll, immigration has now passed the government. It used to be that the government was considered the biggest issue, and now or the biggest problem that there was to be solved. Now it's immigration. Government is now number two. The top four, based on Gallup, was immigration, the government, the economy, and inflation. And of course, economy and the inflation are kind of one and the same, but people tease those two out as separate things in their thinking. Immigration comes in at number one. I don't know anyone, Alexis, no matter where they stand on how to solve the immigration issue, where they would be considered Republican, Democrat, right, left, center, up, down. Everyone, I don't know, is of one mind that our immigration right now, everything on the border is just a mess. Mm-hmm. Everybody, it's a mess. And the key concern, I think, when based on surveys about it, has to do with we just have to control the influx. In other words, it's illegal immigration. It really is the heart of the matter. Just that we're losing control of our borders. So when you ask what's made this number one, I think that's what continues to come out in poll after poll and survey after survey. Christians are understandably torn on this because they are simultaneously concerned about illegal immigration, but along with the sense that there's a responsibility to care for those who are wanting to enter, and even those who are already here in the country illegally, even if they shouldn't be here. I mean, they're human beings, and so there is that sense of caring for them and concern for them, and concern about, families getting separated, and husbands from families, and mothers from children, and so forth. They want to secure the border to prevent additional illegal immigration. I mean, everyone is of one mind on that. But they also want to solve handling citizenship, or at least handling the basic humanity of compassion, just the basic extension of that, even if it does involve deportation, even if it is a matter of, if they're here illegally, we need to, find a way to exit you out. Even that among Christians is like, well, how do we handle that in a way that is God-honoring, even if they shouldn't have been here and did it illegally? It's not like all of a sudden you treat them in an inhumane way simply because they did something maybe they shouldn't have done. Right. So it's that combination of fearing the sheer volume of immigrants, but also the responsibility of compassion that I think is at the tension with Christians, but also, that kind of explains also why this has become such a front burner issue.
Yeah. I want to come back to that tension in just a minute. But first, you mentioned fear. And I would say that there's no doubt that fear has played a huge role in the way that immigration reform and immigration policy are promoted to the public. In fact, you wrote a blog recently on fear and just its strong impact on what we do and what we believe, mobilization. And yet, you also noted that fears are often misinformed. What fears do you think are being sold to Americans regarding immigration?
Well, you're right. We are fear driven on this and on a lot of other issues. And, I try very, very hard to be balanced and careful, obviously, on everything. But just as a pastor, as a Christian, I don't have a lot of patience for fear based issues when that's all it is. The fears tied to immigration because it cloud our thinking. But anyway, let me not jump ahead. Let's talk about that. The fears tied to immigration are many, but many of them are based on things that a Christian has no business basing a fear on. Let's go ahead and walk through some of those. The first one that comes to mind is bigotry. Just let's call it what it is. That with the influx of immigrants from certain communities, there's an automatic assumption we'll have an increase in crime. In other words, if someone comes to America from the South, they are more prone to being a criminal. That's bigotry. That's prejudice. Let's call it what it is. No Christian should be a bigot. A similar fear is that the influx of immigrants will alter our culture automatically for the worst. That somehow, some way, that what we have created here in the United States is superior to anything that anyone else might bring to the table culturally. Or that somehow, some way, we just simply have a superior culture to the rest of the world that we have to protect. Or that we wouldn't be served by other cultures and what they might bring, just the raw diversity of that. Let's call that what it is. That's racism. You hear phrases like, and I've heard this from more than one sector, so I'm really not trying to point this out at one person, but you heard this from multiple places where people will talk about how they will poison our culture. Not of God. Let's just call it what it is. It's not of God. And if you know your history, even your immediate American history, you know how incredibly served America has been by immigration, how our brightest moments, our greatest minds, our most amazing leaders, our communities coming from around the world have just made America what it is. America is what it is through immigration. Just please take one visit as a tourist when you're in New York to Ellis Island and just be amazed at this is what formed us as a country. If there's something to protect, it was created by immigration. So let's just be candid about that. And theologically, we have issues too that need to be dealt with. That I think needs to be spoken to related to this. The foundation of the doctrine of humanity is that every human being is made in the image of God. When people wonder, is immigration really a Christian issue, biblical issue? Oh my goodness. I mean, oh my goodness. Let's just deal with the image of God. We could talk about stuff in the Old Testament later and foreigners and strangers in the land and such. But for right now, let's just ground ourselves in theology 101. To be made in the image of God means that when God made us, he put something of himself in us. He gave us a spark of the eternal, a portion of the divine. He gave us a soul. And that soul is what allows us to do what only humans can do, which is to be in a relationship with the living God. This is decisive to who and what we are. Nothing else in all of creation carries that standing or holds the position of bearing the image of God, not plants, animals, reptiles, insects, fish, birds. When it comes to humans, we alone were made in the image of God with a soul able to respond to and relate to God. And that's why every single human being, every single one, has absolutely incalculable value. They are image bearers. Doesn't matter what color their skin is or how much money they make, where they live in the world, what their natural dialect is, or the state of their mental or physical capability. Every human being is of incalculable value and significance because they were made in the image of God. God gave them that significance. They bear his image. That's what gives every human life its sanctity. So this is the basis of why we can say slavery is wrong, basis of why we can say human trafficking is wrong, why murder is wrong, why racism is wrong, why sexism is wrong. Anything that would demean the value and worth of a human being is wrong. Why? Because every single human being is made in the image of God and as a result has infinite worth, including those at our border. So you have these fears related to bigotry. You have fears related to racism, none of which has any business in a Christian vocabulary or a Christian theology. And then there are fears that are quite frankly based on conspiracy theories that no Christian should entertain. We should be better thinkers than that, than to entertain them. Probably the biggest one is considered or called the Great Replacement Theory, conspiracy theory, which has inspired violence in the past and could do so again in a heartbeat, sadly. This is what was behind, to kind of recall some headlines, the Pittsburgh Tree of Life synagogue shooter, the El Paso Walmart shooter, the Buffalo supermarket shooter. It's behind a lot of the terrorism of our day. The idea behind this conspiracy idea is that a powerful group of elites are deliberately replacing white Americans with immigrants. And then, depending on the audience of who that conspiracy theory is being shaped to influence or to scare, the conspiracy is presented differently. Sometimes it's rooted in anti-Semitism, like it's the Jews that are the ones that are trying to displace us. Sometimes it's the African American community or the Hispanic community or people from one country or another country. Sometimes it's rooted in politics, such as the idea that the country one particular political party, for example, is bringing in immigrants on purpose to dilute the strength of another party, all leading to an increase in physical confrontations. And of course, the whole idea, beyond being false, is that it dehumanizes fellow human beings. It just dehumanizes them. It's very similar. And in fact, when I remember when I first began to catch wind of this particular conspiracy theory, I was horrified, not just on the face of it, but because as someone who has attempted to study history carefully, I was hearing almost verbatim the rhetoric of the Nazi Party. It was almost exactly what the Nazis espoused during World War II. I mean, it's scary how almost like somebody took a script. But having said all that, let's be really clear. Having said all that, there are legitimate concerns with immigration, such as the limited resources that we do have in this country or in any other country. Every country's got to deal with this. We have limited resources to care for the people that we have, much less the people that might want to come. You have the inability, perhaps, to find jobs, the scarce resources to care for those in need. If there are people seeking to come here illegally because they're fleeing justice in their own country for crimes that they committed, I mean, all of these are legitimate issues, and no one is denying it, and nor should they. This is what you wrestle with, as leaders. So while Christians, at least, should resist the fears of seeing an immigrant as any more of a threat to safety than anybody else, there is a legitimate concern based on the drain on economic resources. And I think there's also a legitimate concern about a threat to law and order when we don't have some process that navigates between legal and illegal immigration. But it is concerning. Having said all that, I think it is very concerning that based on the latest surveys, most Christians and an increasing number of Christians see immigrants as a threat to safety. More see them as a threat to safety than they do an improvement to diversity or a boost to entrepreneurship. In 2022, 46% of Christians felt that the number of migrants entering the country was an opportunity to show love. That was just 2022. Almost half of all Christians said, hey, it's a great opportunity to show love. That dropped to 38% in 2024 in just 2 years. But again, as you mentioned, I wrote recently about just fear in general, and in the fear, and in the blog that you mentioned, I brought up how fear doesn't just motivate; it clouds your judgment.
Mhm.
It really does. If you give into fear and you develop a mentality that you're under siege, then you really develop an anything goes mentality. If you really give yourself over to that, when fear rules, then what you fear, defeating it, avoiding it, overcoming it, getting rid of it, becomes the ultimate aim. And you have a sense where the ends justify the means. But not only is there much about immigration we should not fear, as Christians, we have to remember that we shouldn't be driven by fear at all. One of the things that I pointed out, and I've never gone back and counted to see if this is true, but I have read in more than a few biblical tomes that fear not in one form or another is listed 365 times in the Bible, which, coincidentally or not, is exactly the number of days there are in a year, as if we do need biblically that daily reminder.
Yeah. Well, currently, and these are approximations, of course, but there are about 2 million people who enter the US each year, many illegally, and there's a wait list of about 15 million. And the majority of those that are granted legal immigration status are immediate relatives of US citizens. In fact, only less than 15% granted legal immigration status are refugees or asylum seekers. And yet, that small slice of the immigration pie is what causes so much controversy because of the large number of illegal border crossings, particularly in the name of seeking asylum. Now, most Americans are sympathetic to those who are seeking asylum, but want immigrants to go also through the legal process. And to me, this goes back to that tension that you were talking about, this tension that we often feel, even as Christians or as non-Christians, but between grace and justice, law and mercy. But as Christians, we know a lot about that tension. Can you expound on that a bit?
Yeah. As mentioned, there is this tension between a concern for illegal immigration and a concern for those immigrants as human beings made in the image of God. I think there's also a sense, or at least should be, of the opportunity to introduce these people to Christ and to show them Christ's love. But let's address the nature of your question about how to think about this Christianly, because that's something that a lot of people just aren't doing. When it comes to cultural issues and political issues, and this is one that's hypercharged as both, we need to think and act and vote as a Christian, to not give in to partisan politics, but to give in to Christian reflection, to look at the issues and the stands that various parties and candidates have taken and think Christianly about them. That's what it means to be salt and light. And that's exactly what many of us, sadly, do not do. What we tend to do is to compartmentalize our thinking. A compartmentalized mind is one that separates life into distinct categories, such as, well, here's our faith, there's our family, there's our job, there's what I do on social media, here's the stock market over here. And we don't integrate them. It's all without integration. Our thinking about one area never informs our thinking about another. So you can be a Christian and never reflect about an issue in light of your faith. What does it mean to think about immigration biblically? Not just politically, emotionally, based on fear, partisan things, conspiracy theory, biblically. What does it mean to do that? What does it mean to think about the poor? And many of these people who are coming to us are. What does it mean to think about the poor biblically? It's stunning how few Christians even attempt to look at the issues through a biblical lens. I remember reading a study that came out of Lifeway that was surrounding the 2016 election cycle, and it found that only 1 in 10 Christians said the Bible shaped their political views. 1 out of every 10. That's it. So 90% of Christians said the Bible was not informing, shaping their political views. The vast majority said what influenced them were friends and the media. That's what influenced them. Now, don't get me wrong. Even if we were to all be biblical, you can have 2 Christians agree on the values of the Christian faith, but disagree on how best to value, how to flesh them out, or to get to the biblical goal legislatively. And I get that. But to only have 1 out of every 10 bother even to find out what those biblical values are is unconscionable. We've just got to work toward having a Christian worldview. And worldview is a key word. It's coming up. It's come up on our podcast multiple times, and it's such an important one. Your worldview is a set of ideas by which you judge other ideas. It's how you engage the vast range of human thought and creation from a Christian perspective. It's how you think Christianly. For example, you just take a basic question. Where did we come from? That's a basic foundational question, but it's also key to a Christian worldview because there's just a limited number of answers at our disposal. And how you answer that shapes how you look at the entire world. You can say we came about by chance, which is a naturalist contention. You can say that we don't really exist, which is a Hindu understanding. Or you can say we were spoken into existence by a creator God. For the Christian, the answer to where did we come from gives a foundation for thinking that none of the other worldviews do. We would say that we were spoken into existence by the living God. We were created by the Creator. And because we were created, as we were talking about earlier, there's value in every person. There's meaning and purpose to every life. There's also someone and something above and outside of our existence who stands over it as authority. And that changes everything. If there is a God, just the idea that there's a God who stands over us, authority, changes everything. Because that means truth is not something that I create for myself. It is something I discover and that I submit to. Truth is given to us. It's not determined by us. That blows apart a lot of cultural thinking and gives clarity on a lot of cultural issues. And I think an easy example, and I've used it before, but because I think it's one that brings hopefully some clarity. You just think about the impact of Martin Luther King Jr. His Christian faith, his worldview was everything in challenging racial discrimination and segregation. Because the answer for him, where did we come from, was, we were spoken into existence by God. And because that was his worldview, he could write something as absolutely, culture shattering as the letter from the Birmingham jail, where he said famously, there's two types of law. There's just and there's unjust. But how do you know whether one's just or unjust? And then he goes on with his worldview. He said, a just law is a man-made code that squares with the moral law of God. And an unjust law is a code that is out of harmony with the moral law as given by God. And then from that, he said, all segregation statutes are unjust. I don't care what the American laws are or the European laws are or the world laws are. God's moral law is spoke. And from that, I have a prophetic stance where I can say what is right, what is wrong. He laid claim to a law above man's law. No other worldview would have given King the basis for such a claim. And from that, he was salt and light in a day that needed it. So one can be a Christian, but not reflect about the immigration debate, for example, in light of your faith. Or even worse, never even have the thought of reflecting about immigration in light of your faith come to mind. So with that in mind, and when it comes to immigration reform, I think I might be getting to your question now. Christians know that the issues are clear. And they are things such as border security, whether there's a path to citizenship for undocumented immigrants and what that path should be if it does exist. And, probably third would be how to handle the unity of immigrant families. Mm-hmm. But again, only 1 in 10 of Christians said the Bible was shaping their views on things like that. The vast majority said they were just influenced by friends or by media. Only 1 in 10 on what is arguably, they say themselves, the biggest issue of our day, and certainly one of the most spiritual. Only 1 in 10 said they looked to the Bible in regard to how to think. And let me add, it wasn't because there wasn't a lot there in the Bible to think about.
Well, maybe we could talk about that then. The Bible does have a lot to say on immigration, actually, if people do take the time to look for it, more than most people think anyways. I just think of, when God initially called Abraham, he called to be the father of the Hebrew people, he called him out of his homeland to do that. And before they had land of their own and became Israelites, the Hebrew people were foreigners in Egypt. And when they eventually did gain their freedom, they had foreigners living among them. So how did God, if we look at the Bible, how did God help his people to navigate their own immigration issues?
And God greatly judged harshly the nations that refused to help the Israelites while
Yes.
they wandered and when they were entering the promised land.
Yeah.
Wherever you stand on the various dynamics of immigration policy and reform, the Bible does call us to some very specific ideas that, are just non-negotiables. I mean, they're really not, ones that we quibble about. They're just there. For example, there's the rich deposit of verses that speak to the people of Israel in the Old Testament, as you mentioned, when they were immigrants, and how they should, in turn, it was really interesting. It wasn't just how they were to be treated, but also God was very clear to them. Do you remember when you were immigrants?
Mm-hmm.
And there was a lot of calls to the people of Israel. Remember that. And this is how you should then treat others in a similar situation, because you were once that way. For example, you find this in Exodus 22, where it reads very, very clearly, you must not mistreat, you must not oppress foreigners in any way. And then there's that tagline, remember, you yourselves were once foreigners. And then just a chapter later, that pivotal section of Exodus, you must not oppress foreigners. It says, you know what it's like to be foreigners because you were self foreigners in the land of Egypt.
Mm-hmm.
Don't ever forget that captivity and how you wished you'd been treated. And that idea is all through the Bible, ideas of mercy, compassion, empathy, concern toward foreigners, toward aliens, or as often used in the Bible, and this may be eye-opening to people because they haven't equated this word with foreigners and aliens or immigrants or anything, but it's that biblical word strangers. Strangers. That was actually the more common term, strangers. In the Bible, they were always to be treated deferentially because of their vulnerability as strangers in the land. In the New Testament, you find this as well. This is not just an Old Testament motif. In the New Testament, Jesus picked up on the same idea. Like, for example, just think about his famous use of the sheep and the goats in Matthew 25. There he made it clear that how we treat, how we interact with and care for those who are hungry, thirsty, naked, who are sick, who are imprisoned. And then on the list, he said, and I was a stranger. He added stranger to that, pulling straight from the Old Testament language, and said, and when I was a stranger, to the sheep, he said, you invited me in your home. To the goats, you did not invite me into your home when I was a stranger. Now, no matter how much people who follow Christ can differ on hammering out the specifics of being kind to strangers and welcoming them, the specifics of immigration reform, the specifics of protecting our borders, caring for the stranger, the alien, the foreigner is a deeply biblical idea. Showing them mercy, honoring their families and children, treating them with dignity and with the love of God, and being empathetic to their plight. So we can have, again, I can't stress this enough, we can have all kinds of policy differences on how to carry out those values as Christians. The biblical values themselves we are trying to protect as Christians are crystal clear.
Well, that leads me to my last question, and forgive me if I'm being redundant, but I do love to leave things as clear as possible.
Because I'm a little muddied. Maybe if I can bring you back and bring clarity to this.
No, because you hit on so many.
Lex, I'm trying.
More that you hit on so many interesting and important topics and little bits and pieces of your answer. And I just like to bring them all together kind of at the end and summary. But so as we mentioned, immigration policy or reform is so complex. You name things about it's hard to agree on who to let in, how many people to let in, what type of care to provide them, what to do with people who have entered illegally, and on it goes. And like you said, you'll be really hard pressed to find two people who love God, who could agree unanimously on all of the complexities of that. And yet, I feel like now, I don't want to say more than ever, but it is so important right now for the church to be united in our witness to the world. And so again, at the sake of being redundant, what can the church agree on? What must we agree on when it comes to immigration?
Now, let me try. I think first, I hope I'll state something that's obvious. First, as a Christian, be political. Be deeply political. Be passionately political. Be as salt and light, but do it as salt and light, not as a partisan player. Hold fast to the idea that if you are a Christ follower, you are a Christ follower first, you're a Democrat or a Republican second. The goal is to develop a biblical worldview by which to engage all issues and then to apply consistently that worldview, to look through things through that worldview. And as you act and as you vote, you'll be evaluating which one you think upholds the most biblical worldview and the most compelling aspects of a biblical worldview. Because again, they're both. I mean, just look at both parties, for example. They're both going to get some things right. They're both going to get some things wrong. And you're going to have to work through that first and foremost as a Christian as you act, think, and vote. Christians can differ on policy points and legislative maneuvers and legislative strategies, but not on the key values that make up the Christian faith. And that's where we can have unity, and we should have unity. The key values of the Christian faith. You can have an honest, robust argument and even strong disagreement on some of the particulars. But if someone were to say, here are the 5 key values, and then those 2 Christians should say, well, absolutely, we sign off on all those. But we're just trying to get at it. Maybe we think it's solved differently. So we can talk. So let me see if I can make that clear. We can talk about how to serve the poor, but we are called to serve the poor. We can talk about how best to preserve the sanctity of human life, and even when it begins in terms of ensoulment and personhood, but we are called to preserve the sanctity of human life. We can talk about how best to bring about social justice, but we are called to bring about social justice. We can talk about how best to be salt and light in relation to sexual morality, but we are called to be salt and light in regard to sexual morality. Bottom line, be political, but as Christian first, and politico second. But beyond that, how can we unify? Beyond those Christian values, although that I think is first and foremost. Most Christians, I think, when it comes to this particular issue, and we'll make it very laser sharp on immigration, most Christians have certain priorities they think that should be reflected, and I think that Christians can rally around these. Around 9 in 10 say they support political immigration legislation that respects the rule of law. Okay. That ensures fairness to current American taxpayers. Okay. That respects the God-given dignity of every human being. All right. And protects the unity of the immediate family and guarantees secure national borders. Well, I mean, if Christians can rally around those 5 that I think are fair, commonsensical, biblical, I think that we should agree on those, rally around those, and then have the humility to say, now there could be differences of opinion on how to go about that. But those are the 5 targets on the wall, or collectively that's the target on the wall, I think would help a great deal and would diffuse a lot of things where we make some of the specifics the issue as opposed to, just one way of solving what are really the key values that we're trying to bring to bear.
Yeah. Well, we'll leave that there for today. I mean, this has been rich in and of itself. And again, just as always, Jim, I mean, I say this a lot to you offline, but just online as well. Thank you for taking some of these really hot topic issues head on. It's more surprising to me that we've done almost 100 episodes or nearly, or maybe about, I don't know at this point, and we're just now getting to immigration. I don't know if that speaks to the craziness of our world or just maybe we should have tackled this before, but I'm just happy that we're doing it and I hope it really serves. So I'm looking forward to whatever we have to talk about next week, and I hope you guys join us for that. Thanks.